Conscience is that magistrate of God in the human heart whose still small voice the loudest revelry cannot drown.
Those are the words of William Henry Harrison, our 9th president and the subject of this, the 9th episode of the Dead Presidents Podcast. Welcome to the Dead Presidents Podcast. I am your co-host, James J. Hamilton.
And I'm Stephen Lincoln Douglas.
You've got, we're going to be dealing with the shortest presidency on this episode, but that doesn't mean that this episode isn't jam-packed full of amazing stuff for you.
That's right, listeners. William Henry Harrison's brief tenure as our nation's 9th chief executive, well, short, period. Nothing too much sweet about it, as you'll learn. But this episode, maybe not so short, but 3 times as sweet. We got a big one for you. We got an incredible top 5. And you're going to learn more about William Henry Harrison than you ever thought you could.
Indeed. But before we get into William Henry Harrison and his tragically short presidency, we're going to lighten the mood with the top 5.
Yeah, let's shift from tragedy to comedy as we examine the top 5 funniest presidents.
You know, being president is a tough job. And it helps to be able to lighten the mood.
That's right, James. You know, sometimes things are tough. Things are sad. And you get angry. However, certain presidents have been able to approach the most difficult job in the country with humor. Always with a bit of humor. And that's going to bring us to our top 5 this week in front of a live studio audience.
Very special.
We have the top 5 funniest presidents.
Number 5.
Harry S. Truman.
Truman said as a boy, his vision was too poor to play baseball. Since I couldn't see the ball, he said, they gave me a special job. Someone asked, "What was that, Mr. President? Cheerleader?" Truman said, "No, umpire."
Writing home during World War I. The men think I am not much afraid of shells, but they don't know I was too scared to run.
I have found the best way to give advice to your children is to find out what they want and then advise them to do it.
It's a recession when your neighbor loses his job. It's a depression when you lose yours.
I never did give anybody hell. I just told the truth, and they thought it was hell.
If you want a friend in Washington, buy a dog.
When you have an efficient government, you have a dictatorship.
Always be sincere, even if you don't mean it.
If you can't convince them, confuse them.
Show me a man that gets rich by being a politician, and I'll show you a crook.
A statesman is a politician who died 10 or 15 years ago.
It's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit.
The Republicans have General Motors and General Electric and General Foods and General MacArthur. Every general I know is on this list, except general welfare.
I heard a fellow tell a story about how he felt when he had to make speeches. He said when he has to make a speech, he felt like the fellow who was at the funeral of his wife, and the undertaker had asked him if he would ride down to the cemetery in the same car with his mother-in-law. He said, "Well, I can do it, but it's just going to spoil the whole day for me."
Truman once said that 3 things ruined a man: power, money, and women. I never wanted power, I never had any money, and the only woman in my life is up at the house right now.
I fired MacArthur because he wouldn't respect the authority of the president. I didn't fire him because he was a dumb son of a bitch, although he was, but that's not against the law for generals. If it was, half to 3/4 of them would be in jail. Thank you. Please. All right, thank you. That's going to bring us on around to the top 5 funniest president.
Number 4.
Barack Obama. I got my name, Barack, from my father. And I got my middle name from somebody who obviously didn't think I'd ever run for president.
When I was a kid, I inhaled. Frequently. That was the point.
These days, I look in the mirror and I have to admit, I'm not the strapping young Muslim socialist that I used to be.
On Mother's Day, this is a tough holiday for Rahm Emanuel. He's not used to saying the word day after mother.
After I received the news, Malia walked in and said, "Daddy, you won the Nobel Peace Prize, and it's Bo's birthday." And then Sasha added, "Plus we have a 3-day weekend coming up." So it's good to have kids to keep things in perspective.
Upon learning that he and Dick Cheney are 8th cousins, I don't want to be invited to the family hunting party.
Asked whether he would play a round of golf with Rush Limbaugh. Limbaugh can play with himself.
If I had to name my greatest strength, I guess it would be my humility. Greatest weakness? It's possible that I'm a little too awesome.
The White House Correspondents' Dinner is known as the prom of Washington, D.C., a term coined by political reporters who clearly never had the chance to go to an actual prom.
I want to especially thank all the members of Congress who took a break from their exhausting schedule of not passing any laws to be here tonight.
Mocking birtherism. Who is Barack Obama? Contrary to rumors you may have heard, I was not born in a manger. I was actually born on Krypton and sent here by my father Jor-El to save the planet Earth. As some of you heard, the state of Hawaii released my official long-form birth certificate. Hopefully, this puts all doubts to rest. But just in case there are any lingering questions, tonight I'm prepared to go a step further. Tonight, for the first time, I am releasing my official birth video.
Now, I know that he's taken some flack lately, but no one is prouder to put this birth certificate matter to rest than the Donald. And that's because he can finally get back to focusing on the issues that matter, like did we fake the moon landing? What really happened in Roswell? And where are Biggie and Tupac?
Thank you, audience, and that's going to bring us on around to top 5 funniest president.
Number 3.
Calvin Coolidge.
I think the American people want a solemn ass as a president, and I think I will go along with them.
Nothing is easier than spending the public money. It does not appear to belong to anybody.
In the Massachusetts State Senate, a fellow senator complained to Coolidge that another senator had told him to go to hell. Coolidge said, "I've examined the Constitution and the Senate rules, and there's nothing in them that compels you to go."
Someone said, "I wonder if it will ever stop raining." Coolidge replied, "Well, it always has."
Will Rogers asked Coolidge, "What sort of crooks and horse thieves did you meet today, Mr. President?" Coolidge replied, "The cabinet."
On his Secretary of Commerce, Herbert Hoover, "That man has offered me unsolicited advice for 6 years. All of it bad."
Urged to increase spending on military aviation, Coolidge said, "Why can't we just buy one airplane and have all the pilots take turns?"
When more and more people are thrown out of work, unemployment results.
A senator arriving in D.C. asked Coolidge how the weather had been. Coolidge said, "Well, it's been hot here. I was sitting here the other night with a lady who fainted. I don't know whether it was the weather or the conversation."
A painter asked Mrs. Coolidge to wear a red dress to contrast with her white dog. Coolidge said, "Why don't you keep your white dress on and dye the dog red?"
On his speech writing abilities, "I always knew that there was some water in my well, but I had to pump to get it. It is not a gushing fountain."
Perhaps one of the most important accomplishments of my administration has been minding my own business.
A woman seated next to him at a dinner said to him, "I made a bet today that I could get more than 2 words out of you." Coolidge replied, "You lose."
He just as easily could have looked up at this nebby woman and said, "Fuck you." Coolidge and his wife were given separate tours of an experimental farm. Mrs. Coolidge noticed that a rooster was mating very frequently and asked the attendant how often that happened. She was told dozens of times each day. Mrs. Coolidge said, "Tell that to the president when he comes by." Upon being told, Coolidge asked, "Same hen every time?" The attendant replied, "Oh no, Mr. President, a different hen every time." Coolidge said, "Tell that to Mrs. Coolidge."
An excellent joke by Coolidge. In fact, there is a scientific phenomenon named after that joke, the Coolidge effect, which is the phenomenon that males will be more interested in mating frequently if they have a variety of females. All trace back to Coolidge's humor.
Very, very phenomenally cool is Coolidge. And that's going to bring us around to the top 5 funniest president.
Number 2.
Ronald Reagan.
Reagan was asked whether the biggest problem confronting the nation was ignorance or apathy. He said, "I don't know and I don't care."
During the 1980 campaign, Jimmy Carter was supposed to go on 60 Minutes and talk about his accomplishments. Reagan said, "But that would leave 59 minutes to fill."
An economist is someone who sees something happen in practice and wonders if it'd work in theory.
Reagan liked to tell a joke told to him by Mikhail Gorbachev. There was a long line outside a Russian grocery store, and the line never seemed to move. A frustrated man said, "It's all Gorbachev's fault. I'm going to kill Gorbachev." He left and came back the next day. Someone asked if he killed Gorbachev. He said, "No, that line was twice as long."
I'm not worried about the deficit. It is big enough to take care of itself.
On Bob Hope, he loves to entertain the troops and he loves golf. Just the other day, he asked, "What's your handicap?" I said, "Congress."
Referring to countries like the People's Republic of China and the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, Reagan once said, "The other day someone told me the difference between a democracy and a people's democracy. It's the same difference between a jacket and a straitjacket."
The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government, and I'm here to help."
During a mic check before a radio address, Reagan said, "My fellow Americans, I am pleased to tell you I just signed legislation which outlaws Russia forever. The bombing begins in 5 minutes."
When I go in for a physical, they no longer ask how old I am. They carbon date me.
At a 1984 debate with Walter Mondale, Reagan was asked whether he was getting too old to discharge the duties of the presidency. Reagan said, "Not at all. I will not make age an issue in this campaign. I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience."
After being shot by John Hinckley, Reagan was being rushed into surgery when his wife arrived at the hospital. He greeted her by saying, "Honey, I forgot to duck." As he entered the operating room, he said to the surgeons, "Please tell me you're Republicans." The morning after his surgery, White House aides came to see him in the hospital. He said, "Hi, fellas. I knew it would be too much to hope that we could skip a staff meeting." He told his daughter that the assassination attempt ruined one of my best suits.
So courteous of the studio audience to hold their laughter till the end of that series of jokes.
Yes, thank you so much, guys.
We have a very well-disciplined audience.
You've been very wonderful, and thank you for following our rules. That's going to bring us on around to the top 5 funniest president.
Number 1.
Abraham Lincoln. Stephen Douglas accused Lincoln of being two-faced. Lincoln replied, "If I had another face, do you think I would wear this one?"
On his uneventful militia service in the 1832 Black Hawk War, "The only blood I've spilled in defense of my country was to mosquitoes."
When 2 of Lincoln's sons were fighting a neighbor... Fuck. Okay. Okay. When 2 of Lincoln's sons were fighting, a neighbor asked what was wrong. Lincoln said, "Just what's the matter with the whole world? I've got 3 walnuts and each wants 2.
Tact is the ability to describe others as they see themselves.
No matter how much cats fight, there always seem to be plenty of kittens.
Whenever I hear anyone arguing for slavery, I feel a strong impulse to see it tried on him personally.
A persistent office seeker came to see Lincoln and said, "The chief of customs has just died. Could I possibly take his place?" Lincoln said, "It's fine with me if the undertaker doesn't mind."
A woman accosted Lincoln and demanded an officer's commission for her son. She said, "My grandfather fought at Lexington. My uncle was the only man who did not run away at Bladensburg. My father fought at New Orleans, and my husband was killed at Monterey." Lincoln said, "Madam, your family has done enough for the country. It's time to give somebody else a chance."
Lincoln suffered from the poor performance of his generals. When informed that the Confederates had captured a brigadier general and 12 mules, Lincoln said, "How unfortunate. Those mules cost us $200 apiece."
Speaking of frustration with his generals, Lincoln asked General McClellan to keep him better informed of the Army's activities. McClellan mocked Lincoln by sending him a letter saying, "We have just captured 6 cows. What shall we do with them?" Lincoln wrote back, "Milk them."
On complaints that General Grant was an alcoholic, "I wish some of you would tell me what brand of whiskey Grant drinks. I would like to send a barrel of it to my other generals."
A well-wisher told Lincoln, "Mr. President, I'm from up in New York State, where we believe that God Almighty and Abraham Lincoln are going to save this country." Lincoln said, "My friend, you're half right."
Lincoln liked to tell a story of General Ethan Allen going to England after the Revolutionary War, where the English looked down their noses at Americans. At one home, he found a portrait of George Washington hanging up in the outhouse. When he came back from doing his business, his host snickered and asked what he thought of the portrait's placement. Allen said, "It will do good service there. The whole world knows nothing will make an Englishman shit quicker than the sight of George Washington." Thank you. We'd like to thank our studio audience for being here for this top 5. Thank you, guys.
Well, it seems like
have been very well trained.
Seems like the audience is all excited, like they're demanding an encore.
It seems kind of like they are, and
that's why
let's give it to them.
We're going to give them some honorable mentions.
That's right.
Lots of other funny presidents that didn't make the top 5 have some jokes of their own they want in here, so we're going to do some honorable mentions. Franklin Delano Roosevelt gave this great advice on public speaking: be sincere, be brief, be seated.
Theodore Roosevelt said, "A man who has never gone to school may steal from a freight car, but if he has a university education, he may steal the whole railroad."
John F. Kennedy during the 1960 presidential campaign: "Do you realize the responsibility I carry? I'm the only person standing between Richard Nixon and the White House."
LBJ said, "I have learned that only 2 things are necessary to keep one's wife happy. First, let her think she's having her own way. And second, let her have it."
Herbert Hoover said, "Blessed are the young, for they shall inherit the national debt."
And last but not least, Jimmy Carter said, "I have often wanted to drown my troubles, but I can't get my wife to go swimming."
Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter.
Dropping an uncharacteristic burn on Rosalind Carter.
Indeed. And that brings us to the end of our top 5 this week. We want to thank our studio audience.
Yeah, thanks again.
It was very nice of them to gather here and to, just generally behave.
Yeah, there was no heckling.
Yeah, no heckling, no bullshit. So, thank you guys. Why don't you give yourselves a round of applause before we go to a commercial break here? Thank you, audience.
Good.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, that's enough.
Don't think of Jimmy Carter as one throwing down savage burns, but that was a little bit of one.
That was a little bit of one, and if he had plenty of ammunition if he wanted to with his brother.
Yeah.
Billy Carter, who we may talk about at some point down the road.
He'll probably be on some kind of top 5.
Yeah. A nod's the same as a wink to a blind bat. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Say no more.
So that was our top 5 funniest presidents. We're going to take a little break. And when we come back, we're going to delve into the illustrious and pretty much bulk of the life of our 9th chief executive, William Henry Harrison. We hope you'll join us. The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by Dr. Evans Beautifying Lotion. Lotion, lotion, lotion. Dr. Evans Beautifying Lotion is highly esteemed for curing all eruptions, coarseness, redness, and pimples on the face, neck, or hands, and effectually cleaning the complexion and removing all diseases of the skin. Nothing contributes so much to our general success in life as an engaging first appearance. A beautiful and healthful complexion is the pride of all who possess it, and the envy of those who are deprived of it. What can be so affecting to a beautiful female, in whose face nature has displayed her power, as to find her complexion discolored with disgusting pimples, which diminish her charms? Dr. Evans Beautifying Lotion purifies the skin and produces a beautiful hue. It is the only cosmetic a lady should use at her toilet. Gentlemen will also find this a delightful remedy. It is particularly recommended to be used after shaving, as it will prevent the otherwise certain effect of all common soap in turning the beard prematurely gray. Listeners, don't walk around making people sick with your hideously disfigured face, your grotesque and revolting appearance can be a thing of the past. With Dr. Evans Beautifying Lotion, you'll have the whole world in the palm of your smoothly unblemished hand. A whole new you awaits. That's a message from our sponsor, Dr. Evans Beautifying Lotion.
Now a word from our sponsor, Dr. Hitchcock's Worm Tea. Worms, worms, worms. Dr. Hitchcock's unrivaled and unequaled worm tea is a sovereign remedy for worms. Strange and incredible are the effects of those detestable vermin. Many persons go through a distressing course of medicine without any benefit when they might be relieved by using Dr. Hitchcock's worm tea. This invaluable medicine has been tested by the experience of more than 16,000 persons of various ages over 10 years and not one solitary complaint.
Impressive.
Hundreds have called unsolicited and given their decided preference to it. After trying different articles sent forth to the public, they have pronounced Dr. Hitchcock's worm tea the most safe, effectual, and convenient remedy that can be obtained. In not one of the thousands of instances where it has been used agreeable to the printed directions has it ever failed. If you're like most of our listeners, you probably have vile and loathsome worms setting up shop in your intestines like they own the place. Don't let these insidious parasites sap your health. No. 16,000 people have gone from worm-infested to worm-free with Dr. Hitchcock's worm tea. You can be number 16,001.
I was number 15,559, James.
And no complaints from you.
No complaints from me.
That's a message from our sponsor, Dr. Hitchcock's worm tea.
Now, an important message from our sponsor, Dr. Smith's Infirmary and Insane Hospital. Dr. Smith tenders his grateful acknowledgments to his friends and the enlightened public for the liberal patronage bestowed on his establishment for more than 3 years past. He desires most respectfully to inform invalids of every description that now is the time for them to resort to the Thomsonian system of herbal and botanical medicine for their relief. Some of the worst forms of insanity have been cured, and others greatly relieved. For the encouragement of the friends of this most unfortunate class of invalids, Dr. Smith begs leave to state that, from long experience with cases of this kind, he is of the opinion that 9 out of 10 may be easily cured by a timely and judicious application of pure Thomsonian medicine. Among those who have been cured, Mr. C. of East Bethel, after having been given over by his physicians about 3 years ago, has been well and rational ever since. Miss B. of Plymouth, also given over by her physician, was made entirely rational by 5 courses of medicine. Not to mention Mrs. B. of Woodstock, Mr. W. of Williamstown, and Mr. H. of Plymouth. Listeners, we all know Mr. C. of East Bethel and what a batshit maniac he used to be. An absolutely balmy madman. Other doctors threw in the towel on him. But after a brief stay at Dr. Smith's Infirmary and Insane Hospital, he's right as rain. And who can forget the demented Miss B. of Plymouth? That stark, raving lunatic was an embarrassment to herself and a burden on all of her family and friends. But after a little bit of Thomsonian herbal magic, she is once again an upstanding and contributing member of society. Don't take insanity lying down. Go see Dr. Smith and end the madness. That's a message from our sponsor, Dr. Smith's Infirmary and Insane Hospital. Listeners, if you or a loved one suffer from a deranged psychosis, hit us up on Twitter at DeadPresPodcast, where you can learn more about our sponsors and see their original ads published in newspapers during William Henry Harrison's presidency. Brief, albeit it was.
And now, back to the show. We are back. We are about to dive into the life of William Henry Harrison.
What a life.
Indeed, a long, storied life. He's best known for his short presidency, but he had a long life before then, very distinguished, very eventful.
That's right. This guy was preceded by 5 Benjamin Harrisons. Was it 5?
Yeah, William Henry Harrison's father was Benjamin Harrison the fifth.
Yeah.
The 5th generation of Benjamin Harrison.
Like a family reunion where it's like, we now recognize Benjamin Harrison, and 5 guys get up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't happen because they were, not alive at the same time. But
yeah, well, William Henry's oldest brother, Benjamin Harrison the sixth. His second brother was Carter Harrison. William Henry Harrison was the 3rd son, 3rd of 3, and the 7th of 7 children. He was the baby.
Wow.
Born in 1773 at Berkeley Plantation in Virginia to the very distinguished and prominent Harrison family.
Yeah. The historic Harrison family.
Was historic before William Henry was born and will be again after he dies.
Well, was it Benjamin Harrison the 5th was known, quote unquote, as the signer?
Yep. William Henry Harrison's father signed the Declaration of Independence.
But a little bit before that happened, well, William Henry Harrison himself popped out of the womb in 1773.
Yep.
At the family home, Berkeley Plantation in Virginia. And that's just up the road from where John Tyler was born and lived.
Yep, it's right up the road from John Tyler's house. Usually the presidential and vice presidential tickets are like balanced geographically.
Yeah,
while
this was a pretty serious exception to the rule.
Harrison wasn't a Virginian really anymore.
Well, yeah,
by the
not
time
technically, I suppose, yeah.
He ran for president as someone being from Ohio and Indiana, but he was born right up the road from his eventual running mate, John Tyler.
Yeah.
William Henry, according to his mother, was a delicate boy, but he had a lot to live up to with his family.
He did. His father was, like, remarkably distinguished, and that's not to take away from the other Benjamin Harrisons, the 4 other ones. But Benjamin Harrison V, he was in the Virginia House of Burgesses, and he was opposing some British policies, like the Stamp Act. So, naturally, becomes a member of the Continental Congress. He signs the Declaration of Independence. So that's why he's known as the signer. He was a friend of John Adams, who referred to him as Jack Falstaff.
Yep. After the corpulent Shakespeare character, Benjamin Harrison V was 6'4", and he was a big guy, a little bit round.
Wellsian.
It's not too much of a compliment when John Adams is making a fat joke about you.
Yeah, when his rotundity makes a fat joke about you.
Guessing there was a lot of good eating at Berkeley Plantation.
For sure. But upon signing the declaration, Harrison said to Elbridge Gerry, "I shall have a great advantage over you, Mr. Gerry, when we are all hung for what we are now doing." The fat Harrison would die quickly, but thin Gerry would dance in the air for an hour until you are dead.
Yep. Being big and fat is an advantage if you're going to be executed by hanging.
I reckon so.
Which was, a real potential danger for Benjamin Harrison V. In 1781, the family home of Berkeley Plantation was raided by British troops led by the traitorous General Benedict Arnold.
Boom, 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 wow.
Arnold kept the buildings on the plantation standing because he expected that he was going to take over the plantation himself after the war as a reward for serving the expectedly victorious British. But he burned everything else, confiscated 40 slaves. All the family furniture and portraits were burned. Arnold trying to wipe the Harrison family history away.
I mean, he went in there and fucked shit up. Like the treasonable cur that he was.
Yep. But that didn't let Benjamin Harrison V, he didn't let that get him down.
No, he rebounded.
He was Speaker of the Virginia House of Delegates and Governor of Virginia. He served as governor from 1781 to 84. Then he tried to get reelected to the House of Delegates, but lost to John Tyler's father.
Yep, none other than John Tyler Sr.
Apparently, well, I guess they'd have been running from the same district, being neighbors.
That's it.
Although Benjamin Harrison
couldn't eke it out over him.
Benny V got himself elected from another district. He served in the House of Delegates till his death in 1791. By the time of his death, he wasn't quite so rich anymore. The burning of the plantation didn't help.
Yeah.
William Henry Harrison's mother was also from a prominent Virginia family whose wealth also had run out. So after his father died, there wasn't really much left over for him.
Mm-mm.
His older brother, Benjamin Harrison VI, he had served as a paymaster in a Continental Army. He inherited the family plantation. The second brother, Carter, practiced law. He would go on to serve in the Virginia House of Delegates and the U.S. House of Representatives.
But like, as the third son, poor William Henry's education becomes something of an afterthought. He's just... They homeschool him, essentially.
Yeah, for a while he's homeschooled, and then he gets sent to a small college, Hampton-Sydney College, not the very prominent and distinguished College of William and Mary, where his father and brothers went.
Yeah, what a bummer.
Well, being the third son, you're not as important.
Yeah.
But he showed them.
It would be hard.
Yeah, after his father died, his brothers told him, there's no money left over for you. He had been studying medicine. Yeah, that's the thing. He didn't even really care about medicine, but his family just kind of like shoved him into that.
Yeah. He's not stupid. He's learning. He's learning Latin and Greek. He develops an affinity for Cicero and Roman military history. He's particularly fascinated with military history.
Yeah, he was big into that.
After college, he studies under a doctor in Richmond. And the family, to their credit, they set him up for a medical education. Though, like you said, he wasn't particularly keen on it. He just seemed to be like the kind of person that wasn't sure what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
It was a rough upbringing,
Well, he was probably pretty... I mean, he was rich and privileged, but
at the same time,
he was also not as privileged as his older brothers were.
Yeah. So that would be hard. So he just really seemed like he didn't know what he wanted to do, but he was super into the military.
Yeah, he was headed to Philadelphia to attend medical school. When he got there, he found out his father had died and that there was no money left for him to continue his education.
Yeah.
So, just like his family, they're losing their money, but they still have a prominent name and prominent connections. His dad was friends with all the, prominent revolutionaries and leaders. So he dips into his connections. He failed to get a government job, but the governor of Virginia at the time was Richard Henry Lee, who was a friend of his father. Right. He offered to help him get a military commission, and that was promptly agreed to by President George Washington, who was another friend of his father.
Yeah, so their family connections really help him out. And we should also mention that when he, at the time that he went to Philadelphia, he joined an abolitionist humane society. And he would later highlight that episode for Northern voters.
While downplaying it in the South.
Yeah.
Many of
pretty much wouldn't bring it up in the South, and And the North played up.
Yeah, like many politicians of his generation trying to straddle the line on the slavery issue and win support from everybody.
Yeah, and, as we've talked about before, the line straddling, you're pretty much, it's just, you're wrong and you're trying to bullshit everybody.
Yeah.
So, that brings us to William Henry Harrison's military career. He's commissioned as an ensign in the U.S. Army, first serving as a recruiter, and he recruited 80 men, whom he then marched westward to Pittsburgh and down the Ohio River to Fort Washington at Cincinnati.
Yeah, and this is really where he's going to plant his flag and find his future home, pretty much.
Yeah.
Out Cincinnati, pretty much the frontier. When he gets there, it's right after the battle that's called St. Clair's defeat, where the U.S. Army got whipped by Indians under Chief Little Turtle. 600 Americans were killed. The worst defeat by Indians in American history. So William Henry Harrison is out there in dismal frontier conditions. He decried the effects of alcohol on the Army, later claiming, quote, "At least 4/5 of my brother officers died of the effects of intoxication."
That's a lot.
That sounds like it might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's a problem.
There was a problem there.
Yeah.
Boy.
So, yeah, the Army just got beat by the Indians, and they need to get revenge. General Anthony Wayne gets appointed new head of the Army, replacing St. Clair. William Henry Harrison.
Anthony Wayne.
Yep. Harrison went back to Philadelphia on a military escort and fell in with Wayne, got appointed aide-de-camp, got promoted to lieutenant. Now Wayne's, retraining the Army, whipping them into shape for a new campaign against the Indians.
And it's coming. In 1794, Northwest Ohio, and they're more than ready. Because they surprised the badly outnumbered Native Americans at the Battle of Fallen Timbers.
Yep.
And
just like at the end of the Revolutionary War, the Indians up there, they'd been allied with the British, and once things started to go bad, the British stabbed them in the back. After they were getting beat in the battle, they tried to flee back to a British fort. The British shut the doors on their Indian friends and left them at the mercy of the Americans. But Harrison was in the thick of the fighting, acquitted himself well, and earned praise. That battle led to the Treaty of Greenville, which gave most of Ohio to the United States.
Yeah. And Harrison himself signed the treaty.
Yeah, he was one of the signers.
But
who wasn't among the signers?
Yeah. There was one Native American, one and only Native American, and one and only in more ways than one, that refused to sign this document, and that was the young Shawnee chief, Tecumseh, or Tecumseh.
Yep, and that's not going to be the last time he and Harrison
cross paths.
No.
Very important Native American figure in history is Tecumseh.
Yep. And very important figure in Harrison's life.
Yeah, absolutely. Another important figure in Harrison's life comes about not too long after that, when he returns to Cincinnati, being made commander of Fort Washington and being promoted to captain.
Yeah, he's really starting to be an up-and-comer
That's
in
right.
this
So
new Western world.
He's checking out the frontier, and he goes to nearby Lexington, Kentucky. And here, he meets another figure that's going to have a radical and changing influence on his life moving forward.
Yeah, he checked out the lovely Anna Sims, who was the daughter of a rich Cincinnati land speculator. And according to them, it was love at first sight.
Yeah.
Harrison.
Temperamentally, seemed like a good fit. Anna was comfortable on the frontier. She wasn't afraid of the dangers and risks. She's well-read. She's interested in news and politics. And she was educated at a boarding school. So that makes her the first lady to be educated outside the home.
He sounds like quite a catch.
Yeah.
Harrison is,
it really does.
He must be pretty happy when he asks her father for her hand in marriage.
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong? It seems like a perfect match. So William Henry Harrison goes to her dad and says, "Hey, I'd like to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage." And what happens, James?
He says,
"Great, right?"
Actually, no.
Uh-oh.
He says no. He's not too thrilled about his daughter marrying a poor, unpropertied soldier. The fancy Harrison name not meaning as much out here when you don't have any of the old Harrison wealth to back it up. Mr. Sims asked Harrison how he intended to support his daughter. Harrison replied, "My sword is my means of support, sir." It wasn't as impressive to her very rich father.
That's it, wasn't it? "My sword is my means of support, sir, that and my good right arm."
Yeah, that might be what he said.
Yeah. Pretty badass. He stood up to him. But, it's not looking good.
Well,
so how are they going to answer this?
I don't know.
He doesn't seem like the type to shirk and defeat. And she's of a temperament of the frontier. So what do?
Well, neither of them are giving up.
No, they're not going to take no for an answer.
They don't. I guess there's two versions of what happened next. One is that they waited until her father was out of town and got married behind his back. Seems a pretty direct way around it. Another version is that they ended up getting married at her house and that her father was pissed and stalked off in the middle of the ceremony. So he, in that version, he somehow agreed to let it happen, but was pissed.
Wasn't happy about it.
He, I guess, couldn't hold his peace.
Yeah.
And walked off. But he didn't stay mad for too long. Once it happened, he got used to it. And he sold to Harrison a 160-acre farm outside Cincinnati where the young couple lived in a luxurious large log house.
I believe it took some military success on Harrison's part for his stepfather to actually warm up to him.
Yeah.
So the land sale and all that sort of thing, that was probably post some Harrison military success.
Well, I don't know. I think they moved in there soon after their marriage. That was probably more just him,
supporting his daughter.
Yeah, he's probably still not too happy about it, but he's not going to let his daughter live in squalor.
In any case, it took Harrison military success for his stepfather to at least warm up to him.
Yeah.
Because they did not get along until after
started getting
Harrison
famous, yeah.
started getting renowned. And then the stepdad was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then he was all nice and shit.
Mm-hmm. Well,
but that's what it took.
Harrison wasn't joking when he said his sword was his means of support.
You're right.
And he ended up vindicating that.
That's
probably
true.
I'm sure probably a lot of young, swaggering military guys would say something like that, but very, very few would back it up the way Harrison ended up doing.
Yeah. And the Harrisons, they would pretty much, before too long, start popping out kids.
Yeah, they were doing that pretty frequently.
Yep. 10 children, with William Henry straining to support them, saying, "My nursery grows faster than my strongbox."
Yeah, this would be really a constant problem for him for the whole rest of his life, trying to get enough money to support his family.
That's right. Even though, as we've said before, John Tyler holds the record for bearing the most, quote-unquote, bearing the most presidential offspring between his two wives, it's none other than Anna Harrison that holds the singular record for most children birthed by a first lady.
Yeah, she had 10. It took Tyler 2 women to get to 15.
Yeah.
No first lady had more children than Anna Harrison.
Yeah. 10 kids.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
What a
That's hard.
Wide vaginal wall she must have had.
Perhaps. Top 5 first lady. I'm not gonna say
Vaginal walls.
So how is William Henry Harrison going to support this huge family? He doesn't own that much land, just a little bit that his stepfather or father-in-law essentially gave him. He's going to remain in the army till 1798. He resigned to take a job as land registrar, but that's not going to be enough to support this growing brood. But what does he have? He still has connections with big shots in the Capitol. He starts lobbying Congress for the post of Secretary of the Northwest Territory, which at the time the Northwest Territory was basically everything northwest of the Ohio River.
Yeah, it was a big deal. That was a pretty big chunk of land.
Well, how's he going to get this job? Well, just so happened that his dad's old friend is now president, John Adams.
Yeah.
And
that helps.
He got the appointment. And territorial secretary was like second in command under the territorial governor. So it was a substantial post.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, he was also chosen as the territory's non-voting delegate to Congress, where he supported Western land speculation, and the Congress passed the aptly named Harrison Land Act, which reduced the size of tracts that the federal government was willing to sell, allowed land to be bought on credit for $2 an acre. That enabled a much wider spectrum of people to acquire Western land.
Yeah, and that's what we wanted.
Yeah, really good.
It was necessary for the expansion of the country to get people moving out there, get things developed.
Yeah, that gets people out there faster. Before they were just selling land in huge chunks to like rich speculators, and they need actual like real people going out there to live.
That's right. So Harrison here, William Henry, he is got an in. He's got some contacts with the political elite, and he's a frequent dinner guest of President Adams. Things are looking pretty good for him.
Yeah.
He is an up-and-comer.
Yeah, he is. As far, the Western frontier is the happening spot, and he's one of the top guys from there.
That's right. And now, in 1801, Ohio is put on a path to statehood and is separated from the rest of the Northwest Territory. So the remainder of that is rechristened the Indiana Territory. Now, if Ohio is going to become a state, it'll end up with a governor. But what of the rest of the Indiana Territory? Well, it's going to need a territorial governor.
Yeah,
of course.
Another presidential appointment.
That's right.
And who's been having dinner at the White House? William Henry Harrison.
That's right.
No Westerner was more distinguished or well-connected than young William Henry Harrison. He was only 27 years old when he was named governor of Indiana Territory.
Yeah.
Moved his family to the territorial capital of Vincennes, where he built a pretty big brick mansion, far outshining all the other frontier homes. It became kind of a status symbol.
Yeah.
I'd like to see this big-ass house in the middle of the frontier.
Yeah. Spoiler alert, he'd kind of do the same thing with his tombstone.
Yeah.
Which you could see from a long way away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we didn't go to it, but we saw it.
Yeah.
It's a giant shaft sticking up amidst the trees.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of things we visited or did not, this huge brick mansion in Vincennes is called Grouseland, where it still stands today. And on the previous 8 episodes, we talked about our visit to the president's home. This is the first time we're not going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
This is the first home we haven't been to yet, although it's on the agenda. Maybe update in a future episode after we go there. Harrison would go on to have a very long and distinguished tenure as governor of Indiana, serving for 12 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, during that time, he worked to establish a library, an agricultural society, a college, a newspaper. They're building this territory from the ground up.
Yeah.
At
Pretty
first,
badass.
yeah, at first, the entire territorial government was just the governor and 3 judges. And the governor and the 3 judges together constituted the legislature. So that's all the government they had to start out.
That's pretty wild.
After they started getting more people living there, a separate territorial legislature was established. One of the issues was that Congress had banned slavery in the Northwest Territory, and that ban was extended to the Indiana Territory. That's, I think, a little remembered incident in the early history of slavery in the United States that very kind of uncontroversially slavery was banned in the Northwest Territory in the year or 2 before the Constitution was adopted. And Thomas Jefferson was one of the guys behind that. So, you know, who knows what, I guess I don't know exactly what happened to the impulse to not spread slavery into new areas, but it didn't last much longer than the territory that had been the Northwest Territory.
No, it's pretty interesting to think about. And, yeah, you kind of just wonder, like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Well, it's a complex issue, I guess, aside from the fact that slavery is just flat out wrong. William Henry Harrison opposed this ban because he thought that it would slow territorial growth because it would discourage rich Southerners from moving into the territory.
Yeah.
In 1805, the territorial legislature voted to allow black indentured servitude.
Okay.
Which
whoop-de-friggin' do.
Which seems like a underhanded way of having slavery by another name
in the North.
Although Harrison didn't exactly treat it this way when he was governor. He purchased slaves and converted them into indentured servants, which would grant them freedom after their term of service. There was one big incident where somebody died. The estate executor was trying to take some of the black indentured servants back to Virginia, where they would not be indentured servants, but slaves, and Harrison intervened and stopped it. One of them was freed, and the other one, I think Harrison acquired himself in order
Hold it right there. You can't make these people slaves. They're my indentured servants.
Yeah,
there.
Yeah, he did acquire one of them as an indentured servant to, I guess, stop them from being taken out, and that guy was later freed.
Yeah.
So, not exactly abolitionism, but could have been worse.
Well, it's about to get a hell of a lot worse, because we're about to delve into William Henry Harrison's major task as the governor of the Indiana Territory. And this task is, well, the word executing Indian policy. Well, executing is fitting.
Yep.
Executing Indian policy, that's what he was in charge of, and that's what he tried to do.
Yeah, this territory, Indiana Territory, is huge. It theoretically encompasses most of what is now the states of Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan, although at the time most of this land was inhabited by Indians.
Yeah, Native Americans are living here. I mean, there's people on this land.
There aren't that many...
This is settled land.
There aren't that many white Americans out there at first, but more and more are coming, and it's U.S. policy. Well, who should we turn to for the Indian policy of the time, other than the president? You recall in the Jefferson episode...
That's right, that wonderful quote from episode 3.
We read a long quote from Jefferson that encapsulated Indian policy. What we didn't mention was that the recipient of that letter from Jefferson was William Henry Harrison.
Yeah.
There's a book about William Henry Harrison's career during this time, and the title of the book is Mr. Jefferson's Hammer.
Yeah.
So that kind of says it all.
Does that not say all that needs to be said about William Henry Harrison's role in the Indian policy of the time?
Yeah.
The hammer.
Well, let's see what Jefferson's policy was, as he stated in his letter to Harrison. Our system is to live in perpetual peace with the Indians, to cultivate an affectionate attachment for them by everything just and liberal which we can do for them within the bounds of reason, and by giving them effectual protection against the wrongs from our own people. When they withdraw themselves to the culture of a small piece of land, they will perceive how useless to them are the extensive forests, and will be willing to pare them off in exchange for necessaries for their farms and families. To promote this, we shall push our trading houses, and be glad to see the good and influential individuals among them in debt, because we observe that when these debts go beyond what the individual can pay, they become willing to lop them off by a cession of lands. But should any tribe refuse the proffered land and take up the hatchet, it will be driven across the Mississippi and the whole of its lands confiscated.
Yeah.
That's Thomas Jefferson's orders to William Henry Harrison.
Yeah, and he's pretty bloody successful in implementing it, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
You get 7 treaties with Indian tribes that result in acquiring 50 million acres of land for the average price of 2 cents an acre. This includes most of Illinois, southern Indiana, and parts of Wisconsin and Michigan.
Yeah, and if you recall the Harrison Land Act, where the price that white settlers could buy land on credit was $2 an acre. We're getting it off the Indians for 2 cents an acre. So the government is making 100 times profit, really, on the land that we're forcing Indians off of. And now you heard in Jefferson's quote how he said, we want to protect the Indians against the wrongs of our own people. But here's what Harrison says when he writes back to Jefferson, eventually after all this stuff plays out. Harrison said, "I wish I could say that the Indians were treated with justice and propriety by our own citizens, but it is very rare that they obtain any satisfaction for the most unprovoked wrongs."
Yeah.
He told Jefferson that the Indians make heavy complaints of their ill treatment on the part of our citizens. They say that their people have been killed, their lands settled on, their game wantonly destroyed, and their young men made drunk and cheated of the pelts which formerly procured the necessary articles of clothing, arms, and ammunition to hunt with. Of the truths of these charges, I am well convinced.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
Harrison not necessarily sounding happy about this, but not able to do anything about it.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing where, an Indian hurts a white person and all hell breaks loose, but white people take advantage of Indians and the community won't back measures against them. No jury will convict a white man of killing an Indian, no matter how bad it is. One of the things Harrison tried unsuccessfully to do was to outlaw selling alcohol to Indians, because it was the practice of American traders to sell alcohol to Indians, get them drunk, and then swindle them out of their fur pelts. Yeah. Because that was a big trade at the time in furs. That's how the Indians, other than giving away their land, the only trade good they had to offer was they went out and hunted fur pelts that white people coveted, but then the American traders will swindle them out of them so they don't really get the value they're supposed to get.
Right. And that was an all too common practice.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Also, as governor, William Henry Harrison was the commander of the territorial militia. He's a former regular army soldier. He recognized the need for good soldiers, and he's going to take measures to ensure that the militia is both well-trained and well-equipped. And this is pretty important, James.
Yes,
the British and the Native Americans, neither one are happy about American colonial expansion into those 50 million acres that Harrison has acquired.
Yeah, Indians want that land for themselves. British want that as a sphere of influence. Neither of them too happy about Americans expanding out there. They're looking to form an alliance.
That's right.
And here's where our old friend Tecumseh comes back into the Harrison story.
Yeah.
He, as a young man, pissed off about the Fallen Timbers campaign, pissed off about the 50 million acres. He is a charismatic leader who began organizing all the Indian tribes in the region into a confederacy. Yeah. That was the thing about taking over the Indians in this area. It's like the old Julius Caesar strategy of divide and conquer. Mm-hmm. The Indians, before Americans came around,
were fighting each other.
They fought each other for a long time, and now Americans come in and exploit those differences, isolate tribes, and systematically push them all away.
That's why I love Tecumseh so much as a figure. Is he was smart enough to say, there's too many of them. We have to put aside our differences. We have to bond together if we're going to survive.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it only went so far.
Yeah. Yeah, ultimately, he was
Unfortunately for them, I mean, I guess, fortunately for the United States, But
Yeah. I think Tecumseh
what
was
a sad state.
Tecumseh was almost, I think, born too late for this strategy to work. This is really something Indians needed to have been doing decades earlier.
Yeah.
Because by this time, the population of the United States is huge and expanding, and the Indian population is dwindling, and there's ultimately just not enough of them, even if they all unite.
Yeah.
Which is what they started.
That's it. Tecumseh was born too late.
But they did start to unite under Tecumseh's leadership, and it was William Henry Harrison who complimented Tecumseh, saying, "The implicit obedience and respect which the followers of Tecumseh pay to him is really astonishing, and more than any other circumstance bespeaks him one of those uncommon geniuses which spring up occasionally to produce revolutions and overturn the established order."
That's a really great quote.
Yeah. He certainly inspired a lot of respect among the Americans who had to go head-to-head with him.
Yeah, and that says something for William Henry Harrison, too, because he wasn't just like, oh, that scum Tecumseh.
Yeah.
My enemy. That swine. You know, he respected him. He knew that Tecumseh was really something special. And speaking of something special, Tecumseh's brother was a medicine man named Tenskwatawa, also known as the Prophet. And he started a religious revival, encouraging the Native Americans to return to their old customs, avoid alcohol, and refrain from overhunting the land. So, these two brothers
They make a formidable team.
Yeah. They started up a little partnership and established the settlement of Prophetstown in eastern Indiana on the Tippecanoe River.
Yeah, and as Tecumseh and his brother are organizing and getting the Indians together, it's creating a tense situation with the United States. It was 1810 when Harrison met with Tecumseh. Tecumseh argued that the land belonged to all the Indians, not any particular tribe. And if the Americans didn't stop acquiring Indian land, there was going to be war. That meeting degenerated and almost broke out into a brawl. And a year later, 1811, Harrison and Tecumseh had another fruitless meeting, after which Tecumseh traveled south to try to recruit more tribes into his confederacy. He went down to the Choctaw and Chickasaw and Creek tribes. Only a small faction of the Creeks, the Red Sticks, heeded his call. The rest of those Indians rejected him and ended up joining with Andrew Jackson and the Americans to fight against the Red Sticks in the Creek War. Yeah. But before that happened, William Henry Harrison took advantage of Tecumseh being out of town.
Yeah.
And he put together 1,000 men and marched on Prophetstown. Tecumseh had warned his brother not to be drawn into a fight, but the prophet didn't listen. He believed in his own magic and assured the Indian warriors that the white man's bullets would bounce off them like raindrops. And the prophet's men, they really believed in him, and one of the reasons why had to do with William Henry Harrison. He kind of, at one point, kind of sarcastically almost suggested that, hey, you know, if he's so great, why doesn't he show some miracle? Like, what's some proof of his power?
Where your mouth is, prophet.
If he's really a prophet, ask him to cause the sun to stand still. And that one kind of came back to bite William Henry Harrison, because the prophet knew something that Harrison did not. He may have learned it from his British allies, but there was a solar eclipse coming up, and when that was ready to go down, the prophet assembled his men and ordered the sun to go dark, and it did.
Yeah.
So that really convinced them that he knew his shit.
Yeah.
And so they were ready to follow him into battle, believing that they're destined to win and that everything's on their side.
Yeah.
Even though Tecumseh had told them to stay out of it.
Yeah. And Harrison was also under orders to avoid violence if possible.
Yeah.
So he stops outside of Prophetstown. And he receives a delegation of chiefs who asked to have a meeting the next day. They ask him, move your men to a different campsite. He agrees. So he orders his men to sleep dressed and armed for battle, but he didn't fortify the camp.
Yeah, he later got some criticism for that.
Yeah.
Because a few hours before dawn, the Indians attack.
Yeah.
And the Americans were pretty surprised at first and disoriented. They couldn't see what was going on and suffered a lot of casualties at the outset. But they held their position. Harrison was moving men around to plug holes in the line. They withstood several charges from the Indians. Then as the sun started to come up, the Americans could see their targets now. They started to gain the upper hand as the Indians were running out of ammunition, and they began to melt back into the woods. Harrison was unhurt, but took a bullet through his hat brim, real close to taking a headshot.
Yeah, close call.
And with the Indian warriors dispersed, Harrison marched his men into Prophetstown and burned the village.
Yeah, just completely razed it.
Burned, including 5,000 bushels of corn and beans. He also had the cemetery dug up.
This just goes above and beyond.
Yeah, this is really fucked up.
This is truly fucked up.
This is what, I mean, it said this in the book that I read. It didn't really elaborate on this at all, but it's really fucked up. Had the cemetery dug up and left corpses strewn about.
Just totally disrespectful.
Yeah, and it's contrary to the way Harrison behaved after a later battle, so I'm confused by that.
Yeah.
The Americans did suffer 62 killed, 126 wounded, which was more casualties than the Indians had suffered. Although all these Indian warriors who melted back into the woods would live to fight another day. But the United States saw it as a huge victory. President Madison praised Harrison, noting the collected firmness which distinguished their commander on an occasion requiring the utmost exertions of valor and discipline.
Some high praise from James Madison for...
That's the Battle of Tippecanoe, and that would be Harrison's nickname for the rest of his life.
Yeah, old Tippecanoe. So that is going to stick with him moving forward.
That's where he literally made a name for himself.
Yeah. So,
but that's just
what's the truth on Tippecanoe? Was it a glorious routing? I think there's a lot of questions.
It was really just the beginning. It didn't really win. Didn't really win anything much, but it started a war that would continue. Because a year later is 1812, and there's a war in 1812. I forget what it was called.
Yeah. What was the war in 1812 called?
I don't know. Let's just call it the War of 1812.
I guess.
Listeners can look it up on their own.
For the sake of moving on.
So yeah, that year the United States declared war on Britain, and now there's going to be full-blown hostilities with British and Indians fighting together against the United States up in this theater, Harrison lobbied for a general's commission in the Army, but at first he was passed over on the first round of appointments, went to a lot of older Revolutionary War veterans, including William Hull. General Hull was commander of that theater at first, but he ended up getting surrounded and surrendering Detroit to the British and to Tecumseh and his Indians. After that debacle, Madison did commission Harrison as a brigadier general and put him in charge of the command to relieve Detroit. He got 3 regiments of Kentucky volunteers and was marching them north, burning Indian villages along the way to protect his rear. Also burned some villages that were not really fighting against the Americans.
Yeah. He just basically
better safe than sorry.
Didn't discriminate in his wanton violence.
Nope. There was a regiment of Army regulars under General James Winchester that was supposed to join up with Harrison in northern Ohio, but Winchester went farther into southern Michigan, retook a town from the British on the Raisin River. However, the British and Indians counterattacked and captured Winchester's army before Harrison could get to him. The British retreated with the American captives, but they left 80 wounded Americans in the hands of their Indian allies, who began massacring them.
Yeah.
Kind of understandably, given what had been going on,
I would say,
at the hands of the Americans.
Yeah, and
30 of them were killed before Tecumseh intervened to stop the massacre.
Tecumseh, man, can't understate how important a person in history he was.
Yeah, he was quite a man. But after that incident, Remember the River Raisin became a rallying cry for the Americans who wanted to avenge that incident. Harrison built Fort Meigs in northern Ohio, and in May 1813 withstood a siege by the British and Tecumseh. In fall of 1813, something good happened up in that theater for the Americans. Oliver Hazard Perry defeated the British Navy on Lake Erie, and that really compromised the British hold on Detroit. So Harrison was able to retake Detroit, and the British and Indians were retreating. Harrison was chasing them. With reinforcements, Harrison is now joined by Kentucky Mounted Volunteers under Colonel Richard Mentor Johnson.
A very interesting character. Richard Mentor Johnson, congressman, vice president under Martin Van Buren, and infamous character in history.
Yep, you may recall him from the Van Buren episode where we discussed him a little bit. This is where he made his name for himself, because the Americans caught up with the British and Indians on the Thames River. Harrison had 3,500 men against only 800 British and 500 Indians. And you can probably guess how that's going to turn out.
Right.
Tecumseh persuaded the British to make a last stand, but when Harrison charged, the British pretty quickly broke and ran and left the Indians hanging yet again.
Yeah.
But the Indians weren't going to break. They were going to make a valiant last stand. Richard Mentor Johnson led 20 men on a somewhat suicidal cavalry charge.
Yeah.
where almost all of his men were killed or wounded. Johnson himself hit 5 times but kept fighting. After the battle, Tecumseh was dead.
Yeah.
And people were saying it was Richard Mentor Johnson who killed him. Johnson said only that he had killed a tall, good-looking Indian. But people were saying that it was Tecumseh, and he let him keep saying that. And that was his major avenue towards his political career.
That was his whole claim to fame.
He was the man
lived off the
who killed
fact that
Tecumseh.
He was the man that killed Tecumseh, and disgustingly enough, Kentucky soldiers mutilated a corpse that they believed to be that of Tecumseh.
Harrison was, quote, mortified by that particular act. And he didn't mention Tecumseh's death in his report of the battle, which Richard Johnson later accused him of doing to try to minimize Johnson's role in the battle. And then Harrison claimed that that the story that Johnson had killed Tecumseh didn't arise till later. Who killed Tecumseh became a political, football got thrown around years later when all these guys were jockeying for political positions on the basis of the reputations they made here.
What a stupid thing to try and get fame for.
Well,
no matter who killed him, none of them were as great as him.
That's true.
If William Henry Harrison had killed Tecumseh, he couldn't have said that he was a better man.
No.
But he's the man we're talking about.
Yep, and that was the Battle of the Thames, and it was hailed as a great American victory. In the War of 1812, only the Battle of New Orleans really surpassed it in greatness.
That's right, and that's, in part because we won big.
Yeah, those were the battles that we really won big. Harrison embarked on a tour of American cities where he was celebrated as a hero. But the Secretary of War, John Armstrong, personally favored other generals for advancement, so he kind of needled Harrison by auditing his payments to contractors, giving him a hard time. You may recall John Armstrong from the Madison episode as the Secretary of War who bungled and allowed Washington to be burned.
Yeah.
And was later fired or forced to resign. So Harrison's getting a hard time from the War Department. At the same time, his father-in-law died, and he was charged with sorting out the chaos of his father-in-law's massive Western land holdings. So Harrison sent a resignation to Madison, possibly hoping that Madison would get Armstrong off his back.
But intercepted.
Yeah. Armstrong intercepted the resignation and accepted it on Madison's behalf.
Wow.
Armstrong, man, did not acquit himself well.
No.
Not in that war.
So Madison ends up giving Harrison a different commission to negotiate peace treaties with Western Native American tribes.
That's something he was good at. That was
Indeed.
Kind of his consolation prize at the end of the war.
But now, he's got a bit of a name for himself. So he's going to dip his big toe into the pool of politics.
Yep, he's got those 10 kids to take care of. He needs to get some kind of position to make money. And he wants to cash in on his newfound fame. He moved back to North Bend, Ohio, outside of Cincinnati, to that 2-story log house that he lived in after his marriage.
And this is going to come back into play later on. Bigly.
Yeah, the fact of him living in this log house is, remember that.
Yeah.
But see, he expanded it into a large 16-room mansion.
Because he could.
And because he had to. He had 10 kids.
Yeah. Yeah, not just because he could, I'm sorry. Yeah, because he had to. He did have 10 kids.
His family crammed into this 16-room mansion. And in 1816, Harrison was appointed to a vacant seat in the U.S. House of Representatives and was then easily reelected to a full term.
Yeah. He did well enough that he's, like, with ease, just reelected in his own right. So
he's a war hero.
He either, like, didn't have anything too, like, consequential to deal with, he did well enough, or he just straight up didn't fuck up to the point that people were like, yeah.
Yeah, well, he's a war hero, second only to Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, and there, people aren't overlooking that. They're already making...
Yeah, also 12 years of very successful governorship in Indiana.
Yeah.
In Congress, he successfully advocated for pensions to widows and orphans of men who had died in the war. He unsuccessfully advocated for universal military training for all young men. He argued that the greatness of the Greeks and Romans was founded on such training, but there wasn't really a constituency for that at the time.
Not quite.
He supported debt relief for Western landowners. And when in Illinois statehood was debated, Harrison declared himself to be personally against slavery, but voted against banning slavery in new states and territories.
We've seen it again and again.
Yeah, we talked about it in the Monroe episode with the Missouri Compromise. That's the big issue for the next
coming up.
Expansion of slavery into new territories is the major issue that's going to lead to civil war.
And a sad spoiler alert, it's not going to stop.
Nope. After his term, Harrison did not run for re-election, returned to Ohio to try to sort out his own financial affairs, got himself nominated for the less demanding job of Ohio State Senate, where he could be close to home. In this campaign, he was criticized for being pro-bank because there was populist outrage in Ohio against the newly rechartered Bank of the United States and against banks in general.
People were fed up.
This is, about 1819? The next, 20 years is going to be a lot of anger against banks. Harrison had once been on the board of a Cincinnati bank, but he did vote in Congress to repeal the recharter of the Bank of the United States and ran as an anti-bank candidate. When in the state Senate, he promoted militia improvements and increased public schools and voted against a resolution urging Congress to ban slavery in Missouri. That's related to the Missouri Compromise, which would allow slavery in Missouri and points south.
He decides not to run for re-election, but goes on to run 2 failed campaigns for the House of Representatives and 1 failed campaign to be governor of Ohio. Things aren't looking too bright.
Yeah, it's the early...
What's happened
I don't know, it's the early 1820s, and it seems like maybe his war hero fame has dried up.
Yeah.
Nobody's
it just doesn't seem
thrilled
like it's
about
working.
William Henry Harrison anymore. But things turned around a bit. 1825, the Ohio State Legislature chose Harrison to fill a seat in the United States Senate.
Perhaps good fortune.
Indeed.
He's chosen to fill a seat. Would he have won it in his own right? Based on the past? Couple runs, perhaps not, but he's chosen to fill a vacancy.
Well, that's the thing that the senators were chosen by the state legislatures at the time. So he's not winning campaigns with the voters, the regular people, but the state legislature chose him.
There we go. That's an important thing to remember, listeners.
Well, maybe later in his career, his appeal to the people might turn around. But not at this point. In the Senate, he supported President John Quincy Adams in efforts toward national infrastructure improvements. He also, Harrison had a bunch of failed business ventures around this time. This huge family is just sucking him dry.
Yeah.
And he's not that great of a businessman. He needs money. And that's why he's trying to get into public office. In 1828, when John Quincy Adams is running for re-election, Harrison tried to get himself nominated for the vice presidential running mate of John Quincy Adams. He didn't get that. Then he started lobbying for a diplomatic posting to Mexico or Colombia. John Quincy Adams, I think this was in his diary, had some opinions about William Henry Harrison at this time.
Yeah, he did.
JQA wrote of Harrison, "This person's thirst for lucrative office is absolutely rabid. Vice President, Major General of the Army, Minister to Colombia. For each of these places he has been this very session in as hot in pursuit as a hound on the scent of a hare."
Yeah.
John Quincy Adams considered Harrison, quote, "a political adventurer with a lively and active but shallow mind."
Yeah. John Quincy Adams doesn't think too much of him.
Yeah, I think if you recall, I think one of the quotes we read at the end of the John Quincy Adams episode was from William Henry Harrison, basically saying JQA was too bookish.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think JQA thinks Harrison's not bookish enough.
Yeah, he had scathing words for John Quincy Adams, and, well, he apparently mustered all he could to try and come back.
Yeah, John Quincy Adams.
With a rejoinder to these words. Now, one point I should make is the things John Quincy Adams is saying here about William Henry Harrison, leaning towards truth. The things that William Henry Harrison said about John Quincy Adams, fishing for insults.
Yeah.
Really reaching.
Well, yeah, Harrison
really reaching.
Probably felt maybe a little bit snubbed.
I'm sure he did, and so he tried to think of something that would just straight up insult him, but, I feel in that, insult throwdown, JQ way, boy.
Yeah.
Coming out on top.
Yeah, Harrison didn't get vice president, didn't get major general, but he had enough friends and supporters that they kind of cajoled JQA into naming him Minister to Colombia.
So that's not a bad post. You got a salary of $9,000 a year.
Yeah, that was a lot of money. I think the diplomatic post had the highest salaries in the U.S. government except the president. $9,000 a year. I think cabinet members got paid about $5,000 a year, and $9,000 a year is a lot of money. That also, unfortunately, does not include a lot of the expenses that they incur, so they have to cover their expenses out of that. But that is a lot of money,
and it's
for a government
not just
job.
A lot of money. It's a big fucking deal. At the time, Colombia includes Venezuela and Ecuador, and it's led by Simon Bolivar, the revolutionary hero who won independence from Spain.
Yeah, Harrison I think it ended up taking him a long time to get down to Columbia. And, when he got there, he was well liked by the Colombians, but almost as soon as he got there, he found out that the new president, Andrew Jackson, during Jackson's first week in office, one of the first things he did as president was to appoint a replacement for Harrison.
Yeah.
He spent all that time lobbying for a post, all that time getting down to Columbia, and he barely gets down there when he finds out he's been sacked, essentially, by Andrew Jackson. And some people were shocked at the speed with which Jackson moved to oust Harrison.
Yeah.
But Jackson was bearing a little bit of a grudge.
Yeah, I think he had reason to do so because he almost certainly remembered the time that as a member of the House, William Henry Harrison had voted with the minority to censure Jackson for his execution of a British subject in Florida during the First Seminole War, which we discussed in episode 7.
Yeah, and episodes 5 and 6 probably.
Yeah.
That's where Monroe sided with John Quincy Adams against censuring Jackson and backed Jackson, which was part of leading to the Adams-O'Neese Treaty and the cession of Florida to the United States.
That's right.
But Harrison was in the House at the time, and he voted. I think there was... the thing Harrison did is he tried to split the difference, because there were 2 British subjects that Jackson executed, and Harrison voted against censure for one of them, but for censure on another one. And Jackson remembered that.
That's an interesting technique.
Well...
What do you think was his... What was his idea in doing that?
I don't know. I guess they maybe occurred in 2 separate incidents, and maybe he thought one of them, the incidents was, fair, and then the other not. Maybe he was just politically trying to split the difference. Maybe
that would be kind of shrewd,
not
right?
Well, it was until Andrew Jackson became president.
Yeah. In terms of an attempt for a non-politician, that would be like a,
Yeah, so now things really don't seem that great for Harrison. He spent all this time trying to get a post, and he gets fired as soon as he gets set up in it. He comes back from Columbia to face more financial difficulties. His oldest son died. His second eldest son in the grips of alcoholism.
Yeah.
Harrison trying to hold his family together.
We'll talk about it
through
a little
these
bit
difficulties.
later, but there was a lot of tragedy in the Harrison family.
Yeah.
There really was.
Yeah, and he's trying to hold all that together. He ran for the U.S. Senate again in 1831.
And he's on the brink of ruin when he does this.
Yeah, he loses his election for U.S. Senate, and he's about to lose everything. He gets an appointment as clerk of the county courts, which doesn't seem like a very distinguished office for somebody
seem like much of anything.
who was a national war hero, a U.S. senator. But this is actually a pretty lucrative office, because there are lots of fees associated with it that the clerk of courts gets to collect. So while it's not powerful, it is remunerative.
Yeah.
And it kind of helps save him financially. But it looks...
And let's not forget also that Andrew Jackson is the president of the United States right now.
Yeah.
And Andrew Jackson was a figure that was molded in the form of Washington. And it was a successful campaign. And so the Whig Party is looking for an answer to that. And who do they have at their side? None other than William Henry Harrison, whom they can compare with Jackson easily. and keep on that Washington mold.
Yeah, Harrison seemed to look like his political career was over, but then the new phenomenon of Jackson shows that, a war hero can be a figurehead for a national party, and the Whigs kind of went in on that.
Yeah, and not just a war hero figure, but a representative of the common man. That was Jackson. And remember that log cabin from before? Well,
was it really a log cabin?
Was it?
It might have been something a lot more fancy,
I don't know.
But it's close enough.
Could have been really fancy, but
It's
you're going to try and use it.
It's close enough for a campaign.
You're going to try and use it, but
Well, it's
underdeveloped at this point a little bit.
Yeah, we're getting almost 4 years ahead of ourselves on that. But keep that in mind. But it's 1836. Jackson is retiring after 8 successful years. His hand-picked successor, Martin Van Buren, looking like he's going to sail to an easy victory. The Jacksonian Democrats are on the rise. The Whig strategy in the 1836 election was to field multiple candidates in different regions, hoping to split the Electoral College vote, as in 1824, and throw the election to the House of Representatives.
Yeah. And that's what's unfortunate and preemptive about our talks of Harrison before, with the log cabin and all this. If they would have focused themselves in 1836, they might have had a serious shot. Who knows? Because it could have been, we have a chance at like another Jackson type, or the guy that Jackson says is good, Van Buren. And we look at Van Buren.
Well, the Whigs are still pretty new in 1836, and they're not organized yet.
That's true.
They don't really have, they don't have the party structure to rally around somebody.
Yeah, and they pretty much ended up totally splitting the vote. The Whigs had 4 candidates running. The major candidate among them was William Henry Harrison, who would end up carrying 7 states and garnering 73 electoral votes.
36% of the popular vote.
That's right. But the Whigs also had Hugh Lawson White of Tennessee with his running mate John Tyler carrying 2 states with 26 electoral votes. Daniel Webster of Massachusetts with Francis Granger as his running mate, with 14 electoral votes and 1 state carried. And Willie P. Mangum, a Whig of North Carolina, with his running mate, also John Tyler, 11 electoral votes, 1 state carried. The clear victor, Martin Van Buren, with his running mate, Richard M. Johnson. The controversial Richard M. Johnson.
Yeah, that's when Who Killed Tecumseh becomes a national presidential election issue.
That's right.
But Van Buren becomes president. He's riding high, but not for long.
That's right.
If you recall episode 8.
Yeah, Van Buren comes in at a pretty bad time. Some shit's about to go down.
Yep, very beginning of his term, the Panic of 1837 hits, and it's an economic meltdown.
It's a disaster, and Van Buren's efforts to right it result in another panic.
Can't get it going. But the Whigs see this, and they begin salivating about the election of 1840.
Yeah.
Because it looks like the Jacksonian Democrat ascendancy is very vulnerable.
Yeah. They're vulnerable. They're weakened. They're wounded. And
pretty early,
maybe they're starting to think about 1836 and saying, like, hey, like, we had these thoughts about Harrison. I mean, what if we just made that the sole focus of this campaign?
well, a lot of Whigs start pretty early in that direction. In Ohio Whigs had a convention in July 1837 favoring Harrison for the next election. Representative Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania held a convention of anti-Masons in Philadelphia that nominated Harrison for president. Anti-Masons, the anti-Masonic movement being popular with many Whigs.
Yeah.
And then you had Thurlow Weed of New York, who was a party organizer, kind of saw himself as the Whig Van Buren.
Yeah.
His main goal is he wanted to block Henry Clay from getting the nomination because he felt that a Kentucky slave owner would turn off New York abolitionists.
Yeah, and New York abolitionists and abolitionists in general, and we've mentioned this in the previous episode, the previous two, they're getting more common.
Yeah.
And more outspoken.
Indeed. And, Clay's status as a slave owner could be a liability in the Whig Party. Thurlow Weed is eyeing General Winfield Scott as a candidate. And with all these candidates, the Whigs, they're finally going to get organized, and they're going to hold their first national nominating convention, taking a page out of Martin Van Buren's book to defeat Martin Van Buren for a re-election.
Yeah.
December 1839.
Again, the influence of Martin Van Buren. Like, I'm sure, like, if our listeners just go to the basic homepage and they look at, like, episode length, they're like, why is Martin Van Buren so long? Well, because the guy created a political party that, has essentially lasted.
Yeah. Might be wondering, why is the 31-day President William Henry Harrison's episode so long? Well, you're hearing about it now.
That's it. This is why. You know why now. No need to question it anymore.
We're in December 1839. It is the Whig National Convention. The candidates on the table are Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, Winfield Scott, and William Henry Harrison. How's it gonna turn out?
Boom, 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 boom.
Now, like Clay, he was the Whig leader in Congress. He'd been a major national figure for decades.
He's the chief Whig.
The whole party's practically
it's built around his principles, essentially. I mean, he is the big man on campus. This is Henry Clay's party.
Yeah, but he's kind of a polarizing figure.
Yes,
Jackson obviously hates him. He
carries that stain.
Jackson hates him. He's probably not the kind of guy to lure Jackson fans
the
out
stain
of the Democratic Party.
Party will never go away. Like, as late as 1844.
Clay's
it's
still
not
hearing
going to
about
go away.
it.
The corrupt bargain was the crow that feasted on the liver of the Prometheus that was Henry Clay.
Yeah, in Greek mythology, Prometheus gave mankind the gift of fire. The gods punished him by chaining him to a rock and had a crow feasting on his liver constantly. It seems like Henry Clay gave John Quincy Adams the gift of the presidency and was punished for it for decades afterwards.
That's pretty much it.
But what William Henry Harrison had going for him at the time is that he was kind of a blank slate who didn't offend anybody, and that people could make him into what they wanted.
Yeah. Another hero general. I mean, seemed to have an in.
Yeah, that the convention, the first ballot started off Clay. It was Clay with 103 votes, Harrison 91, Scott 57. Then Thurlow Weed started drumming up support for Scott, who looked like he was taking the lead on the second ballot. Then Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania walked on over to the Virginia delegation, showed them a letter that Winfield Scott had written to New York abolitionists supporting their cause, which prompted Virginia to dump Winfield Scott in favor of William Henry Harrison. Thurlow Weed saw Harrison's momentum and began to support him as well, and on the third ballot, William Henry Harrison won the Whig nomination. Then they had to choose the vice presidential running mate. Daniel Webster refused to be considered for the meaningless vice presidency.
Yeah.
As did many prominent Clay allies, so the convention settled on former Virginia Senator John Tyler, former vice presidential candidate in the last election.
Well, yeah. In 1836, John Tyler was the running mate of both Hugh Lawson White and Willie P. Mangum.
Yep.
So he had two chances to become vice president.
Mm-hmm. Also, former, basically neighbor of the Harrison family.
That's right.
Whose father had defeated Harrison's father in the Virginia House of Delegates way back in the day. Tyler had been a Clay supporter going into the convention, and his allegiance to the Whig Party seemed to consist mostly of disliking Andrew Jackson. He was a states' rights supporter who opposed internal improvements on constitutional grounds, but nobody really asked him much about his beliefs. Thurlow Weed later admitted that they chose Tyler because nobody else would take the nomination. And that would have far-reaching consequences. Yeah. If only Daniel Webster had said yes. Wow, how different things would have turned out.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to contemplate. And Clay was left pretty disappointed that he didn't get the presidential nomination.
Yeah.
But he doesn't prove a sore loser. He throws his support, his full support, behind the Harrison-Tyler ticket. And he does his part.
Yep.
Because Henry Clay pretty much runs that show.
He's a party man, and he wants his party to be in power. He figures even if he's not president, he's going to get his policies through.
Yeah. He may even think more along the line of, well, if I can't be president in name, I'll be president in theory.
Oh, yeah, because, part of what the Whigs hated about Jackson is that he started really throwing around the weight of the presidency and turning the presidency into a really powerful office.
That's right.
Not deferring to Congress. So the philosophy of the Whig Party is that Congress is primary.
Yeah.
And the president takes a back seat. So
Henry Clay really sees his chance for turning the tables of government here.
Yeah, even
with William Henry Harrison, because he sees somebody in his mind that is pliable, that is,
this guy's a
perhaps
figurehead.
A tool.
Yeah, he was a political nobody for years, and we're just going to thrust him into the spotlight.
Yep, make him look like a Jackson-type character, like a Whig Jackson. In the mold of Washington, as we've said, and
then he'll be a rubber stamp for
that's it.
All of Clay's policies.
That's it.
That's the idea. But first, you got to beat Martin Van Buren.
Right. That's going to bring us to the election of 1840.
a monumental election in campaigning history.
It is. This is the first, like, real campaign in history. Well, I mean, I guess that's not entirely true because you did have your Jackson supporters, but
well, a lot of the features
it
of modern
wasn't
campaigns.
like this.
Yeah, a lot of the features
This is the
of
first time you see campaign songs.
yeah, there's songs, slogans, all kinds of rallies.
Yeah.
Eventually, the candidates themselves are out there campaigning, which is unprecedented. Things just get blown like.
This is the first time you see, like, campaign memorabilia.
Yeah. This is the first time you have two very organized parties going head to head.
Right.
The Jacksonians had kind of brought popular campaigning, into the spotlight, but it was almost one-sided when they were doing it. And now both parties are organized, and the Whigs are using the Martin Van Buren playbook and taking it up a notch.
More importantly, they're using it effectively. Mm-hmm. Like, if you look at it as a political chess game and the Whigs are playing as black, well, they had a surprise attack in store.
Yep.
And White was caught off guard because the Whigs mounted a brilliant campaign.
Yeah,
brilliant. One of the greatest election campaigns in history.
Yeah, if
they were so organized and so together with this, it was astounding.
Yeah, William Henry Harrison is like most famous for two things. One being only serving 31 days as president, but the other is the image that was made of him in this campaign.
That's right.
He's more famous for his campaign image than the actual person that we've been talking about all in the episode up till now.
For Tippecanoe and Tyler too, for Tippecanoe and Tyler too, for with them we'll beat little Van.
Yep.
For with them we'll beat little Van, for Van is a washed up man.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
They got everybody all over the country singing songs like that.
Yeah.
The image is born in February 1840. Ohio Whigs have a convention to celebrate Harrison's nomination, and he's described as a brave old patriot and pioneer who had settled down in a log cabin to spend his days as a humble farmer.
Yeah.
A parade featured a log cabin float, the words hard cider written on the door. They're singing songs for the log cabin candidate. Harrison, actually the son of a prominent Virginia family, and his 2-story log house he lived in after his marriage, hardly a humble little cabin. Right. It's now a 16-room mansion, but the image stuck.
Yeah.
Nobody,
we told you it'd come back.
There's no, television and stuff at the time. These songs and these things in the newspaper, they're as true to voters as any actual fact.
That's right.
And Van Buren, who's actually the son of a poor tavern keeper, is painted as a power-hungry Washington elitist who loves fancy clothes and French furnishings.
Yeah, they paint him with a golden chalice of wine in his golden carriage drawn by white horses, while William Henry Harrison is outside of his log cabin, shirt unbuttoned, chest revealed, oiled up, chopping wood.
Yeah.
For the common man drinking hard cider.
Yeah.
There was, I mentioned campaign memorabilia. There was a little, I don't know what to call it, contraption that the Whigs came up with. It was a picture of Van Buren that you pulled a string and the expression changed on it. And he had a chalice. And he was smiling to begin with, and it said, old Van thinks he's drinking fine wine. And you pull it, and he frowns and looks disgusted, and it says, but it's the hard cider of the common man, or something along those lines. It was one of those toy things with like a pool.
Van Buren's too hoity-toity to drink the hard cider that you drink, common man.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. They tried to make him out as like a full-on aristocrat that was totally out of touch with the common American man.
Yeah, and prior to Andrew Jackson and really the popular vote deciding the Electoral College, the elections had been affairs for rich property owners and office holders and insiders, but now
that's right.
Average Americans are deciding the election.
Yeah, for the first time, really.
And now when candidates can be branded in this way, it becomes decisive.
That's right.
And Harrison was branded as the candidate of the common man. And there were songs and there were dances, like the Tippecanoe Quick Step, the Harrison Hoedown. Whigs held huge campaign events, free hard cider, flowed liberally. Whigs had thousands of speakers out stumping for Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Women were involved in the campaign. They prepared food for huge Tippecanoe feasts. Some women wrote pamphlets and gave speeches. Everybody's getting in on it.
That's right. I mean, this was a big, and incredibly well-organized campaign. It's probably it's one of the best campaigns in history. Like I've said it before, I'll say it again. The Whig campaign of 1840 was so well-organized that they could have run anybody.
Well,
and won it.
I don't know. Can they... I think, we mentioned Harrison being a blank slate. That allowed them to use this campaigning to turn him into something very popular.
Yeah.
It might not have been easy for Henry Clay to attract these kind of voters.
That's true.
Because Jackson voters might remember that they don't like Henry Clay. But they don't know anything about Harrison except that he's a war hero and he lives in a log cabin and drinks hard cider.
That argument also of the Whigs could have run anybody, that argument also becomes irrelevant because Henry Clay didn't feel it was necessary to be the president in name in order to implement his policies.
Mm-hmm. He probably figured that he could probably be president after Harrison if he really wanted.
That's right. And so one can't say that the Whigs could have run anybody.
Yeah. Well, the Democrats weren't just going to take this line down. They
couldn't.
They lashed out at Harrison as well.
What a state.
They said Harrison was too old and feeble. He was an empty suit with no opinions of his own. He was a, quote, petticoat general, a coward. They criticized him for not fortifying his camp at Tippecanoe. They gave their vice president, Richard Mentor Johnson, credit for beating Tecumseh.
Yep.
They even accused Harrison of fathering 3 sons by an Indian woman. Harrison spent most of the campaign at home entertaining an endless stream of guests, but in the last 4 months, he started to go out and give speeches himself.
Now, this is unprecedented.
A first.
Yeah. William Henry Harrison, the first presidential candidate to actually go out and speak on his own behalf.
Yep, and presidential campaigning would never be the same.
That's right.
In the North, he denied supporting slavery. In the South, he claimed that no one north of the Mason-Dixon line had done more for Southern rights than he had.
Clever.
Another first, Harrison combated claims that he was too old by having his doctor issue a statement declaring that he was in vigorous good health.
Well,
something that a lot of modern presidential candidates feel compelled to do, to defend their health. You enlist the doctor. Harrison was the first to do that.
William Henry Harrison. And all of this campaigning, combined with the dismal economy brought on by the recent economic panics and depressions, it's going to do the trick. William Henry Harrison is going to win the popular vote 53% to 47%.
That sounds...
234 electoral votes to Van Buren's 60.
Yeah, the popular vote seemed pretty close, but the Electoral College was a landslide.
Totally different story.
And voter turnout in this election was 80%. 80% turnout, up from 58% in 1836. I think that 80% turnout might be a record. At least the increase over the previous
80%?
election was a record.
I have a feeling that 80% might be the record for voter turnout.
Yeah, I think presidential election turnout nowadays is usually around 50%. So 80 is huge. People were super into this.
In the last couple, it's going up.
Yeah, but it's nothing like 80%.
80%.
That's
huge.
That's crazy. In addition to winning the presidency for Harrison, the Whig Party also won control of the House and the Senate. And that's it. Our boy Henry Harrison's the next president.
And the Whigs are set.
Man, it's going to be a huge...
It's going to be such a good 4 years, baby. We got a Whig president general in the mold of Jackson and Washington. We got control of the Senate and House. What could possibly go wrong?
It's going to be a long and fruitful Whig bonanza. Right after we come back from the break, we're going to dive in to the long and fruitful presidency of William Henry Harrison after a word from our sponsors.
Thanks for listening.
The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by Sheriff John Fruit, who publishes this important notice. Sheriff's Sale. By virtue of writ of execution to me directed, certain property will be exposed to public sale at the house of Richard Fruit on Monday, the 5th of April at 10 o'clock a.m. The property of Phineas Welliver, seized and taken into execution. A tract of land situated in Madison Township, Columbia County, containing 104 acres, whereon is erected a log house and a log barn, about 90 acres cleared land, a fine large meadow and good orchard, adjoining the lands of Richard Fruit, John Swisher, and John Funston. You heard that, listeners. Phineas Welliver done got his ass foreclosed on, and now a sweet piece of land is up for grabs. It's got a log house and a log barn, which is all the rage with log cabin candidate William Henry Harrison in the White House.
That's right.
You'll be living like a president, and with downright neighborly neighbors like John Swisher, John Funston, and good old Dick Fruit, you know it's a classy location. So get on down to Dick Fruit's house on April the 5th, ready to bid, and this 104-acre paradise could be yours.
You may see me there.
That's a message from our sponsor, Sheriff John Fruit.
Now, an important message from our sponsor, William Chapin. Whereas my wife, Mary Ann, has, for the third time within 6 months, left my bed and board without any provocation on my part, and only brought about by the meddling interference of 3 or 4 public talebearers, for reasons which she can explain to her own liking. Therefore, I give notice to all concerned that I shall no longer be accountable for her conduct or pay debts of her contracting. Listeners, no matter what stories you may have heard, William Chapin did nothing to justify his wife leaving his bed and board. There's a lot of wild rumors flying around, but that's all hearsay from the mouths of a few sleazy gossip mongers. Don't be taken in by that scuttlebutt. William Chapin is a fine, upstanding member of the community, and his wayward bride better get her ass home ASAP. That's a message from our sponsor, the irreproachable William Chapin.
Now a message from our sponsors, the Elders of the Church of Christ, who publish this important notice. Beware of John P. Hunt. The Elders of the Church of Christ at Leesburg caution the public generally against a certain base individual named John P. Hunt, formerly a member of this congregation, but in consequence of immoral, dishonest conduct, the abandonment of his wife and helpless little daughters, and an extensive fraud practiced on the community, he has been thrown beyond the pale of Christian fellowship.
Now this sounds like a bad egg, James.
That he may not again impose on an unsuspecting community or on some innocent female, we caution them to be on their guard. The said Hunt is by trade a gunsmith and blacksmith, about 40 years of age, 5 feet 9 inches high, dark complexion, black eyes, black hair, round-shouldered, spare features, of genteel manners. He has lately been seen in Missouri with abundant supplies, while his family are here in want. It has only been about 2 years since he imposed himself upon us. His previous life, we are informed, had been quite a rambling one.
A tragic story.
Listeners, be on the lookout for John P. Hunt. That low-down, scum-sucking piece of human garbage left his wife and children high and dry, forcing them to throw themselves upon the merciful charity of the Church of Christ. Meanwhile, that dirty scoundrel is living it up in Missouri and likely getting ready to prey upon another honest Christian community and steal the virtue of another chaste woman.
The dog.
Don't let it happen, listeners. Spread the word about this dastardly reprobate.
Let's spread the word.
That's a message from our sponsors, the Elders of the Church of Christ. Listeners, if you see John P. Hunt lurking around your neighborhood, hit us up on Twitter at Dead Prez Podcast, where you can learn more about our sponsors and see their original ads published in newspapers during William Henry Harrison's presidency.
And now, back to the show.
And we're back. Our boy, William Henry Harrison, is becoming president.
That's right.
He arrives...
High hopes, baby.
He arrives in Washington, D.C. Full wig control. Harrison arrived in Washington, D.C. on February 9th, 1841, his 68th birthday. He was about to become the oldest person to assume the presidency, a record he would hold until 1981, when 69-year-old Ronald Reagan became president.
That's right.
Harrison's wife, Anne, was recovering from an illness, so she stayed back in Ohio. And some were worried that the stress of the campaign had sapped Harrison's strength. He was criticized as being an old man, too old to be president, and then he was out there in campaigning, traveling around, meeting lots of people.
And at the inauguration, he knows there's press.
Mm-hmm.
He knows that he's going to... This is it. This is the first impression.
Yeah, he got to D.C. Almost a month before the inauguration, and the city's crowded. Harrison is constantly inundated with well-wishers and office seekers. Everyone's crowding around him. Everyone wants a piece of him. Henry Clay said, quote, "I think the strength of his mind is unabated, but his body is a good deal shattered."
Yeah.
Not a good thing to have just embarking on the grueling office of the presidency.
No. But despite this, William Henry Harrison uses his inauguration on March 4th, 1841, to showcase his virility and prove to the nation that he wasn't too old for the job.
Yeah, there's a lot of people watching. The crowd is bigger than any inauguration crowd since George Washington.
That's right.
That's the byproduct of the popularization of the campaign. Everybody wants to see old Tippecanoe become president.
Yeah. To begin the day, he forgoes the customary carriage ride, and instead, he rides the inauguration on horseback, making a statement.
Just like a general would.
And then, stripping off his jacket and standing out in the blustery cold of the day, Harrison delivered the longest inaugural address in presidential history.
Not just up to that point, but
no hat,
still
no gloves.
Over 2 hours. He gave a 2-hour inaugural
by all accounts,
address.
over 2 hours. And he began to, after the inaugural balls that evening, the entire excitement of the first day, he began to feel unwell shortly afterward, but it didn't seem to be anything other than just like a cold. So he forged ahead, and he immerses himself in his new responsibilities.
But he's still going out in the elements.
That's
right. It's a cold and rainy time of year. He's going outside, walking around, already not in the best of health, and this is taking its toll.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Well, before we get into this, let's talk about his presidency while he was coherent. Because William Henry Harrison, you know, many people just know of him as the guy that died a month after being elected, but he actually stood up for himself, and he wasn't the servile tool that perhaps Henry Clay thought he was going to be.
Yeah,
William Henry Harrison made a stand.
Mm-hmm. He offered the job as Secretary of State to Clay, who declined. Clay suggested Daniel Webster, who accepted the appointment, but that was about it as far as Clay's major influence over appointments went. He probably thought he was going to be doling out everything to his friends, but Harrison had other ideas.
Yeah. There is an incident that's recalled where Harrison legitimately, snapped at Clay, who was hounding him over different policies, and he said, "Mr. Clay, I will handle my business here. You handle your business at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue."
Yeah, Clay wanted Harrison to call a special session of Congress to begin immediately enacting the Whig agenda, and Harrison pushed back to him, said to Clay, "You use the privilege of a friend to lecture me, and I will take the same liberty as you. You are too impetuous."
Yeah.
Step off, Henry Clay.
Right. Pretty bold.
Yeah,
but, hey, I mean, that seems just, because Clay himself was being pretty brazen.
Yeah, Harrison had campaigned on the, anti-Jackson Whig theory that Congress had primacy, but It doesn't necessarily mean Congress gets to dictate things that are squarely the president's view,
That's right.
like appointments. Like, I doubt Harrison would be vetoing stuff as much as Jackson and really throwing his weight around, but he's also not going to be a rubber stamp. He campaigned against the Jacksonian so-called spoil system, in which the victorious party would get to fill all the government offices with their own partisans. And once he took over, Harrison resisted calls from other Whigs for a mass firing of Democrat office holders.
Yeah.
Harrison actually issued orders to the federal department saying that employees were not required to support the party in power.
Yeah.
So pretty even-handed.
He pretty sincerely hoped to end the spoil system.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have much time, and a lot of the time that he spent actively as president, like, you know, when he wasn't, like, telling off Henry Clay, he's beset with an army, a veritable army of office seekers. At times, his pockets are just overfilled with petitions from people. And
yeah, office seekers were the bane of presidents all during this whole
wait till
era.
you get to Polk's diary.
Yeah. Polk hated it.
His description of office seekers.
Yeah, Lincoln hated a couple of Lincoln's great jokes we quoted earlier were in the face of office seekers.
That's it. And it seems like Harrison is the time when it's really getting bad. Like, I think it started with Jackson because of the common man kind of thing.
Yeah, and probably the idea of the spoil system really opened it up.
Yeah. But it starts to get really bad with Harrison, to where pretty much his time in office is spent dealing with office seekers.
Yeah.
And trying to tell Henry Clay to back off a little bit.
Yeah, so that's really maybe the only major thing he did, but we can tell a little bit from that what kind of president he might have been. And
well, he was going to try and be his own man.
Yeah.
Which is more than maybe his own party gave him credit for.
Yeah, because I think when Jackson first became president, a lot of people thought he was just going to be a figurehead as well, but he became his own, a behemoth of his own.
It seemed a lot less likely with Jackson, just given his temperament.
Yeah.
But with Harrison, hey, maybe so. But it didn't prove that way. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Fate had other ideas.
He didn't really get much of a chance to do anything else or follow through on this stuff.
On March 26th, the 22nd day of the Harrison presidency, he complained of anxiety and fatigue, and he was examined by Dr. Thomas Miller, who was the White House doctor, who had also served under Van Buren. Miller made no diagnosis that day. But Harrison's condition didn't seem to be debilitating enough to prevent him from working. The next day, the president began his day with his standard morning ritual. Now, Harrison had a routine. He would wake up and get himself ready, and he would walk down and browse the markets and do his own shopping, grocery shopping, for the White House.
Just like a common man would.
Yeah. So, he made this walk to the market where it was noted, quote, he had an elastic step and bright eye of manhood. However, later in the day, he was struck with a dangerously high fever and severe chills, The next day, Dr. Miller diagnosed him with pneumonia, with congestion of the liver, and derangement of the stomach and bowels. Due to his age, Miller decided to forego the panacea of the era, bloodletting, and treated him with enemas and cupping, which is creating a blister by placing a hot cup on his skin to draw out the disease. Miller also prescribed laudanum, castor oil, opium, and a cocktail of camphor, wine, and brandy. Not surprisingly, some medical historians have blamed Miller's treatment for Harrison's ultimate fate.
Harrison would have been better off going to Dr. Smith's infirmary and insane hospital.
Yeah, perhaps he would have.
Yeah, just a little aside about Dr. Smith's infirmary and insane hospital. He was touting the Thomsonian system of herbal and botanical medicine, which is, I looked it up, it's a system of medicine that was basically debunked later, but it was popular at the time because listen to what regular doctors are doing. They're bleeding you, blistering you, all this crazy stuff. Just someone who gives you some herbs that might not really do anything might still be better than what a real doctor's doing.
Yeah.
Like placebo would be a better medicine than what William Henry Harrison's getting.
That's right. Well, on Saturday, April 3rd, at 1 o'clock p.m., Harrison was visited by consulting physician Dr. Ashton Alexander from Baltimore, who announced that the president was recovering, sending a short-lived surge of optimism throughout the city. 2 hours later, the president suffered a bout of diarrhea and took an alarming turn. An hour after that, his doctors began talking about the unspeakable. By 5 o'clock p.m., the president was delirious and incoherent as violent bouts of diarrhea supped his remaining strength. His cabinet was summoned to his bedside, except for Vice President John Tyler, who was not in Washington, D.C., but back home in Virginia.
Hey, the vice presidency is meaningless. Why even bother going?
Yeah.
Congress is not in session, I don't think. So,
Well, and this is the first, but not the last time that they started giving an hour-by-hour report of the president's condition being posted. And by 6 o'clock, the report was grim. Quote, "The symptoms all worse. His physicians give him up." Harrison is not doing very well. He has not spoken coherently for some time. However, at one point, Harrison rose a little bit and spoke in what is recorded to have been a clear and calm voice to his doctor at his bedside and said, "Sir, I wish you to understand the true principles of the government. I wish them carried out. I ask nothing more."
Those are his last words?
Those are his last words. Who he was directing them to? That remains a mystery to history. Perhaps in his delirium, he thought that he was speaking to John Tyler. Actually, I've seen books where they just straight up said that he said his last words to John Tyler, but that was not true.
Mm-hmm.
John Tyler was not there. He said his last words to an attending physician. And basically the most accepted theory is that in his delirium, he pretty much delivered a message to John Tyler as though the attending physician was John Tyler. Or perhaps he just felt, relay this message.
Yeah.
In any event, William Henry Harrison would be no more. He would become the first president to die in office.
Just 31 days into his presidency.
Yeah. The shortest tenure of any president to date. And it becomes a really big deal. How do we handle the succession? Is a huge question.
Yeah, that'll be a huge question for episode 10. And John Tyler, it's going to be a lot more controversial than you may think due to some kind of ambiguous wording in the Constitution.
That's right.
It was later clarified in amendments, but at the time, did the vice president become the president, or did he assume the duties of the president and only serve as acting president?
Well,
John Tyler's going to have to figure that out.
But those are questions for our next episode. As for William Henry Harrison, a lavish first presidential funeral. Everything is draped in black.
Yes.
The businesses are shut down.
His body laid in state in the White House, in a coffin with a glass lid. The nation was shocked. Thousands lined the streets.
Yeah.
For his funeral procession.
Funeral directors dressed and shaved the corpse, placing it in a cedar-lined coffin covered with black velvet and silver lace. JQA shows up to pay his respects, and he was dismayed to find the coffin in a hall, unattended and unguarded. So he said something about it. Hey, what's going on here?
Yeah.
No excuse for it. But
JQA may be looking out for his own funeral one day.
Yeah, that's right.
Needed these, you're the president.
Despite that, this funeral's watershed.
Mm-hmm.
It's theatric. Big public display. And it sets the precedent for modern day presidential funerals. There's a lot of pomp and ceremony that goes along with it.
One unfortunate thing, you remember First Lady Anna Harrison didn't come to the inauguration because she was recovering from an illness. She was just preparing to leave Ohio for the capital when she received word of her husband's death. She stayed in Ohio and prepared his final burial site.
Yeah. We're going to quote from a really fantastic book, The President is Dead: The Extraordinary Stories of the Presidential Deaths, Final Days, Burials, and Beyond, by Louis Picone, in describing this monumental presidential funeral. At sunrise on April 7th, Several military outposts in the vicinity fired cannons to usher in the solemn day. Crowds flocked into the city by rail and steamboat, businesses closed, and windows were draped in mourning, prompting Harrison's niece to write that every house was, quote, festooned with black cloth, crepe, or cambric. The body had been removed from the original casket and now lay in a mahogany coffin covered in black velvet and gold lace on a catafalque in the center of the east room. The scent of flowers hung in the air, and Harrison's good friend, John Johnson, said he looked calm and natural, his white hair lying close to his head and his features regular and peaceful. In attendance was the new president, John Tyler, as well as former president, JQA, and future president, fellow veteran Zachary Taylor. At 11:30 a.m., Reverend Hawley began the service and directed attention to a Bible on a table beside the coffin, as he told mourners that Harrison had purchased it after he had arrived in Washington and began every day by reading it. At noon, 30 pallbearers wearing white sashes and representing each state and territory brought the coffin outside and placed it in a funeral carriage that was pulled by 6 white horses. The same steeds were later used for JQA's funeral in 1848.
Wow.
These same 6 white horses. Harrison's beloved horse Whitey marched riderless in accordance with military tradition, the first time in a presidential funeral since George Washington's. The procession was the largest ever witnessed in the city up to that point, with estimates ranging from 10,000 to 40,000 participants. So way more than Donald Trump's inaugural.
Yeah.
So this was a pretty huge deal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, politics were momentarily laid aside, and everybody engaged in mourning the loss of a president that didn't even get to begin his term.
No. A lot of times when some or other place or poll makes rankings of the presidents, sometimes they don't even include Harrison on there.
Right.
He didn't even be president long enough to rank him.
Right. I would argue that perhaps he deserves credit for being his own man.
Yeah.
He definitely stood up for himself as president. He wasn't going to let himself be dictated to. And, you know, who knows what he could have done.
Yeah, he was certainly important, especially for his revolutionary presidential campaign. And obviously, as our listeners now well know, a long and momentous pre-presidential career.
That's right.
Where he did a lot of important things.
Yeah. And, you know, if his legacy to most people is he died after 30 days in office, well, at least that legacy was monumental enough to pretty much alter the future of presidential succession, as we'll learn in our next episode.
Yeah.
But that's going to bring us to the end of William Henry Harrison's presidency.
Yep. There's not much more to be said. We just had a brief moment of silence.
Yeah. We're going to take a little break, and we're going to come back after a word from our sponsors.
Dead Presidents podcast is brought to you in part by the celebrated thoroughbred stud horse, Cock of the Rock. Cock of the Rock is a longtime sponsor, a favorite of our listeners.
Absolutely he is.
And he also happens to be the official stud horse of the Dead Presidents podcast.
No questions.
Cock of the Rock did not buy an ad during the 31 days of the Harrison presidency because, as all of our listeners know, March is not the season when mares are in heat.
Duh.
But Cock of the Rock will be standing to cover mares again next season, and we have an exclusive sneak peek at his latest advertisement. It's actually a song, the lyrics of which we understand were written by Cock of the Rock himself. Now, he must have been inspired by Harrison's campaign songs and wanted one of his own.
That makes sense.
And apparently he has hired the Constitutionalists to help him record it.
Ooh. Getting into the fervor of election campaign songs. And who better to help than the Constitutionalists?
Indeed. Listeners, we want you to head out to your stable right now and ask your mare one simple question. Who do you want to sire your next foal?
Cock of the Rock! Cock of the Rock! Cock of the Rock! Cock of the Rock! Give up, mares, you say. All I gotta say to you is time and time again, say nay. Nay, nay, nay. Tell me not to nay. Well, all I gotta say to when you told me not to nay, I say nay. Nay, 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 nay. So if you ask me why I like the way I'm named, there's only one thing I can name to you, Cock of the Rock. Cock of the Rock. Cock of the Rock. Cock of the Rock.
Wow.
Just wow.
That was a message from our sponsor, Cock of the Rock. And now, back to the show. And we're back. We're going to wrap things up here with a brief discussion of the Harrison family and how they moved on from the tragedy of William Henry Harrison's death. We mentioned earlier Anna Harrison, the record-setting first lady who gave birth to 10 children. So you got to figure her husband's dead. At least she has all those children to comfort her in her old age, right? Wrong. Wrong. By the time of Harrison's death, 5 of their 6 sons were already dead. And over the next 4 years, all 3 of their remaining daughters died. So First Lady Anna Harrison, just so much tragedy. Out of the 10 children, only 1 survived. Only 1 would outlive the First Lady. That was John Scott Harrison, who went on to have a distinguished career and served in the House of Representatives.
Yeah, thank goodness. Turning the tide here. I mean, his son, Benjamin Harrison, is going to go on to become the 23rd president.
Yes, that's right.
Pretty incredible. So, finally, John Scott Harrison turns the tide of Harrison family tragedy Or does he?
Well,
Unfortunately, he does not.
there's one more shocking, tragic incident in Harrison family history.
Shortly after John Scott Harrison's death, his body was dug up and stolen by grave robbers, who then took the body and sold it to the Ohio Medical College at Cincinnati. And this may seem shocking, but it is not an uncommon practice at the time. People would get cadavers basically by any means necessary, and medical schools would turn a blind eye, and they would pay for these cadavers in order to perform tests and experiments and studies.
Train new doctors.
That's it. So, like, it was a common thing. So, imagine you're in the Harrison family. In all this tragedy, you know of all of it. And the great John Scott Harrison passes away. You're already sad. Then the police show up and say, hey, we got some bad news.
More bad news. What could have happened now?
Father's body was dug up and stolen, and we don't know what happened to it.
Wow.
How terrible is that?
Yeah. That's very terrible. That's gotta be the end of it though.
Oh, you would think, James. You would think that would be the end of this tale, but it's not. John Scott Harrison, among his children, you know, Benjamin Harrison, our 23rd president, and another son, John, who happened to visit the Ohio Medical College at Cincinnati on unrelated business of some kind. I could not discern what he was actually visiting the school for, but he was visiting the school on business, and by accident, he happened to discover the missing corpse of his father dangling from the neck by a rope. Can you imagine? John Harrison said, well, I'm really upset that my dad died. And then I'm absolutely beyond pissed off that somebody dug my dad up and stole his body. And then you're just visiting a hospital on unrelated business, and you happen to just round a corridor, enter a room, and suddenly there it stands. Well, there it hangs. The corpse of your father.
Yeah, it seems a pretty ignominious way to store cadavers, just period.
Yeah.
Let alone former congressmen, sons and father of presidents, whose body was stolen.
Yeah.
Just a horrific scene that must have been for John Harrison.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
Terrible, terrible, terrible story. But
Well,
Harrison had it a little bit better.
He didn't see it, at least, only had to hear about it. Well, good thing those grave robbers weren't around when William Henry Harrison's coffin was unattended.
Yeah. They made quick work with it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's going to bring us to about the end of William Henry Harrison, James.
Yep.
So So I think that in summation, let's do as is per tradition and leave it to the contemporaries.
Yep.
Andrew Jackson said in 1841, quote, "The Republic may suffer under the present imbecile chief, but the sober second thought of the people will restore it at our next presidential election."
Jackson, not a fan.
Jackson, not a fan. He's throwing some shade. Big time.
Also in 1841, John C. Calhoun said of Harrison, "As unconscious as a child of his difficulties and those of his country, he seems to enjoy his election as a mere affair for personal vanity. It is really distressing to see him."
Back in 1812, the infamous Richard Mentor Johnson said of William Henry Harrison, quote, "He has the confidence of the forces without a parallel in our history, except of the case of General Washington in the Revolution."
That's high praise of his generalship as a younger man.
It is, indeed.
Then in 1843, a young up-and-comer by the name of Abraham Lincoln, a Whig who is hopeful for the new Whig presidency of William Henry Harrison.
William Henry Harrison in 1840.
Abe Lincoln said, "It is true, the victory in 1840 did not produce the happy results anticipated.
Understatement of the year, 1843.
But it is equally true as we believe that the unfortunate death of General Harrison was the cause of the failure. It was not the election of General Harrison that was expected to produce happy effects, but the measures to be adopted by his administration. By means of his death and the unexpected course of his successor, those measures were never adopted."
Ooh. Seems like Lincoln wasn't too thrilled with William Henry Harrison's successor.
No, you remember the Whigs didn't put a lot of thought into the vice presidential running mate, and John Tyler would not turn out to be the Whig that Henry Clay and the boys hoped he would.
Cliffhanger.
If you're interested in learning more about William Henry Harrison, because this podcast wasn't long enough.
Yeah, as if this wasn't enough for you, we got some book recommendations for you.
Yeah, there's several cool books about William Henry Harrison.
The classic, basically, definitive political biography. And I've brought it up before, and I'll bring it up again. The American Political Biography series has an entry on William Henry Harrison by Freeman Cleaves entitled Old Tippy Canoe, William Henry Harrison and His Times. Fantastic reading. But there's some modern takes that are pretty fantastic as well, James.
Yeah, well, I read one in the American Presidents series, which are pretty short biographies. Gail Collins wrote the entry on William Henry Harrison. It clocks in at a short 125 pages.
And we've said it before, we'll say it again. This series, concise but nice.
Indeed. We mentioned earlier the book on Harrison's early career, and particularly with regards to Indian policy, called Mr. Jefferson's Hammer.
Yeah.
William Henry Harrison and the Origins of American Indian Policy by Robert M. Owens. Very important time, and
hugely important time, and pretty much William Henry Harrison in his prime.
Yep.
This was him doing his thing.
That's where he made the name for himself that enabled him to become a figurehead candidate for president 30 years later.
That's it.
Well, that's about it for this episode of the Dead Presidents Podcast. Make sure you check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Dead Pres Podcast. Follow our Facebook page and listen to the podcast. It is available on every major podcast outlet, including your favorite. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. That is, if you like the podcast and want to give us a 5-star review. If you did not care for the podcast, why don't you go take a running jump at the moon?
That's it. Take a flying leap at the moon, baby. We've given you the storied tale of William Henry Harrison. But now, let the constitutionalists give you the musical legacy of our 9th chief executive.
A song that perfectly encapsulates his presidency.
Here is William Henry Harrison. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Fellow citizens, being fully invested with that high office to which the partiality of my countrymen has called me, I now take an affectionate